Okay, I'm very happy to welcome all of you here today on behalf of the Press Club Mumbai and the Network Women in Media India. NWMI, which is the Network Women in Media India, is an informal sort of a collective started in 2002, which has several women journalists across the country as members. These are women journalists across different mediums, across language, and across the country, different parts, from Manipur to Kerala. Freny is a long-standing member of the group, and my duty is just to welcome you all here and hand the mic over to Kalpana Sharma, senior journalist, who will be moderating this evening's event. Thank you.
Thank you, Samira, and thank you everybody for coming. I am particularly happy that to be the moderator for this discussion on Freny's book, which I have sort of watched the whole process as she worked on it, and it's wonderful the final outcome. But before I say anything and before we go any further, I thought we should first release the book. So the three panelists and Freny, please pick up a copy and let's release it. We have to do this. Stand up. So friends, we don't want to make this into a very formal occasion. The idea is that to celebrate the fact that Freny has done this book, and also to have a chance for people to say what they think. We've got other people on the panel who I'll introduce, but I just want to say, I mean, there's no better time to talk about Kashmir than right now. And so therefore, in every respect, Freny's book is a very timely book. But more than that, I think what is important, as I see it, is that it changes the narrative. Because she has focused on people, and specifically on women and children. And you know, as a member of the mainstream media, I feel ashamed at the manner in which the media has completely distorted the narrative of Kashmir, and has reduced the Kashmiri person and citizen into a non-entity who always has a description that is given in inverted commas. So you're a stone thrower, you're a stone pelter, you're an extremist, even militant, and whatever, you know, hardliner, and pro-Pakistan, of course, and so on and so forth. And it's very interesting, I've just come this morning from another discussion on Kashmir. And one of the, I think, important things that were said, which really struck me, is how mainstream media constantly positions the whole thing of politics in Kashmir and political participation only at the time of elections. So when people vote, apparently they are participating politically. But when people come out on the streets and protest, that apparently is not political because they are being maneuvered and by Pakistan. You know, they're doing it at the behest of Pakistan. It's as if individually a Kashmiri doesn't have any agency except within the formal construct that the Indian state has put forward. So I think that is one thing that has to change. And I think the other interesting thing which was said in this other discussion, which really struck me, was one of the journalists there said that I think a lot of people don't realize that post-1990, the generation born post-1990, which has seen nothing else but what is going on at different levels in Kashmir till today, is a generation that has turned anti-India, because that is the only face of India that they're seeing. And I think that is something that has to be taken on board, and we have to think about it. What the consequences of this will be for the future, even as an older generation keeps talking about, you know, coming to some solution for the Kashmir problem. So I just throw these two things out. But coming back to Freny's book, what I really appreciated also as a journalist is that I think it represents the kind of immersive journalism that is required, where you go into an area without any preconceptions, and you build trust, because in any area of conflict, if you are the outsider, which Freny would be, which I would be if I would go to Kashmir, you first have to establish the kind of trust when people will then talk to you. Because why should they talk to you otherwise? Just because you're a journalist, they're not going to talk to you. And then you're able to truthfully put forward what are the stories. So I think the most important thing about her book is it doesn't have any artifice. It doesn't have an agenda. She's not trying to solve the Kashmir issue, but she's actually given space to the voices of women and children, which is, in my view, what a lot of journalists ought to be doing, but somehow get overwhelmed by the need to somehow project that they are understanding Kashmir ka masla kya hai, and then giving forth their version of whatever needs to be done and distorting. And not only distorting, not even hearing sometimes these voices, not even making the effort to hear these voices. So congratulations, Freny. I think it's a really important book coming out at a very important time. So before we get into the discussion, what I'd like is for Freny herself to talk about, first of all, why she did this book and how she did it, and maybe to read something from it.
Well, I think it's so lovely to see so many faces of friends and colleagues. So I'm really, really very touched that everyone made it here. This journey for Kashmir, I think, actually began 2010, and again, in a very nice kind of way, it's a network of our women. On the Facebook scroll, I was listening to Dilna's Boga, who had been stationed there in Kashmir, and she was talking about what a curfew means, and I was just reading the posts, and then finally I think I was as an independent journalist, I was always looking for, well, where can I get a story, where can I get a story? That's how we operate. So I just messaged her that I'd like to come to Kashmir, and she said, this is not a good time. So I said, no, I mean as a journalist, not as a tourist. And then of course, she said, you're welcome, and the only thing was that you have to get used to eating scrambled eggs and noodles. That's all we'll get with the curfew or with the shutdown. That suited me fine because I also live largely on that with my culinary skills. But the trip to Kashmir and the way she was living there among the people and working, I think that gave me the biggest insight in what you say, the immersive journalism. And I really feel that the first few days there was such a tectonic shift in my perception. I was a journalist, I used to edit huge amount of copy coming out of Kashmir, and I knew nothing. I really say that in all things, that from 2010 I had to start learning. The idea for a gender-based book also began around 2011 when we were both returning from a trip in which we were looking at the mass graves. That was the story around that time. They have been existing for a long time, but that was the time when which report came. And we have been hearing horrible stories all day. And as we went past Shopian, I saw these women, and they looked very warily. There was some truth standing. And then they kind of looked around and walked off. And that kind of sparked a discussion. There was a Kashmiri friend with us, and he made a remark to the effect that, even an animal or a creature senses something alien in its home territory and tries to scuttle off or is very uneasy. And that, I think, started putting this idea in my head. How would I like it if in my neighborhood, in my house, there was someone from outside? I was constantly under surveillance. I was constantly under threat. And especially as a woman. So the next year I went back and I started looking at stories of women in militarization and occupation. And again, a lovely coincidence that NWM's Lakshmi Murthy was with Himal, and she was very accommodating with the two articles that I did. And so thereafter I started looking at everything with more of a perspective of a woman. And I remember when I wrote the piece for Himal that one of the Kashmiri voices was that they have been unseen and unheard too long. So after that, I started trying to look at voices and ferreting them out. When finally Rupa Publications offered me a book, commissioned this book, I said that yeah, I would want to continue on this line only. And one of the other things that I discovered was that, okay, there is a larger conflict, there's stories of death, there's stories of enforced disappearances, there's so much custodial violence, but there's also what one of the girls had called the hidden damage. The kind of, what does it do to the psyche? What are the very, very small things that we take for granted here, which is denied to you when you are under occupation? And I remember one of the journalists, Alia Bashir, telling me, we were chatting and she was saying that, yeah, it's election time. I think it was 2014 that this is election time, the state elections. And innumerable shutdowns again and security cordons thrown here and there. And she laughed and she said, we are supposed to, this is a democratic exercise going on, but what freedom is it if my cousin can't even choose a lehenga of her choice for her wedding? Because everything is shut down. And I think slowly, it's these very small, finer details that I started trying to understand. And by now, I must say that Kashmir too had no longer were women unseen, unheard. There are lots of stories coming out. So I started spending more and more time with these women who shared, which I think you'll find in the book. And this kind of hidden damage to them. I haven't been able to go into mental health in this book because of the shortage of space. But what does it mean to live under constant tension, worrying for your children, worrying whether they'll come home at night, worrying, one of the women told me that it's so horrible because at home, one of the younger girls, that it's so horrible because our mothers are in such a state of tension when our brothers go out, that all day long they're on the phone, kya baat hai, kahan ho, halat kharab hai, jaldi aa jao. And in that state, some of the women were saying that one of the other things that happens is that when the boys are sent to the thana or they are picked up, it's more and more the women go out because they are scared that the men folk may be picked up. So this girl was saying that, yeah, I've been holding the home fires. Her father had been sent to jail under PSA, then released, then her brother was under surveillance. And she's saying, this is fine, but when do I get out and do my own thesis, my own work? So I started seeing lots of levels of what women had to go with. Yeah, I think that's one of the other main things that I see here, the huge number of roles they had to play. They are protectors in one way, but they're also extremely political. So how do you balance that out? I think before I wander, I'll just pick up a chapter on childhood and what you were saying about the children of the 90s. So, because I think this is where it starts, So I'll read from a little bit from the chapter on childhood. This is, I begin with Uzma Falak, who's now grown into a very talented writer and filmmaker herself. Your generation brought in the Tehri. The 1989 born writer Uzma Falak was often told by her mother. Like so many of Kashmir's children who grew familiar with words like curfew, crackdown and Tehri, the conflict colored Uzma's life so much so that almost every childhood event came to be bookmarked by the larger struggle for Azadi. People would say, I remember you were so many years old when a particular person in the resistance was picked up. Gunshots in Porton seemed light years away as Uzma and I sat in Naseem Bagh in Kashmir University on a beautiful spring afternoon. Uzma is a woman with many identities, a gold medalist in mass communications from Jamia Millia Islamia, a keen art and poetry enthusiast, an author and filmmaker. But that day she was a child of the conflict as she attempted to sift through overlapping memories and describe the summer of 1996. I remember it clearly, she said. It is etched in my mind. I had gone out with my father to buy household supplies and was given a doll. As I clutched it in one hand and held on to my father with the other, we made our way back home, which was in a volatile area of Srinagar. Just a short distance away from our house, we saw that the neighborhood had been cordoned off. There was a crackdown. Troops had gathered on the streets and nobody was being allowed in. Our house was just a few meters away from us, so my father urged me to approach one of the army men. Ask him, he said, if he'll allow you to go home. I was scared, but I couldn't ignore my father's request as I was very close to him. I crossed the road. I was the only civilian to attempt that. I remember the army man I approached. His boots, his eyes, even his bandana, that dark strip that would cover the hair and part of the soldiers' faces when they were geared up for battle. For me, those were symbols that invoked fear. Nervously, I asked him if I could go home. My mother was at the window and she too pleaded with him with frantic gestures. He remained unmoved. He asked me to go back from where I had come. My father and I spent the night at a relative's home. I could not have understood the dynamics of occupation at that time, but as a child I understood I was not allowed to go home. What followed was a childhood marked by anxiety. Panic and paranoia were palpable in the stories Uzma shared, be it when her brother's toy gun had to be quickly hidden from the ransacked troops, or when her mother misplaced a cupboard key and grew frantic with worry. What if the soldiers wanted that Almirah open? Or the terror when 2 army men were refused entry into a room where the Quran was kept. My mother said that this was a sacred space. I was scared witless. I thought, why doesn't she just keep quiet? What if they shoot her? Fear was a constant factor in the fragments of recollection. One night, a school-going Uzma stayed up late, past 2 a.m., engrossed in her watercolors in the living room. Suddenly, she heard a knock on the main door. Her mother rushed out of the bedroom, visibly nervous, and urged her daughter to switch off the lights and leave the living room without making a sound. The next morning, the family learned that the knock was that of a neighbor who had returned home late after a wedding. Not all stories ended in an anticlimax. Uzma's voice turned low. I meant to write about this episode I'm narrating, but I haven't summoned up the nerve. One night again, we heard someone loudly banging against something. We were alarmed. My father wondered aloud if we ought to investigate, but no one dared step out. It was madness to venture out in the streets after 6 p.m. I tried to peer through the windows to see if we could make sense of what was happening, but it was pitch dark. Nothing was visible. She continued. In the morning, the neighborhood learned that a poor, mentally challenged man who used to live in a small tin shed outside our home had collected scraps of paper for a bonfire, possibly to keep himself warm, and had accidentally immolated himself. He had been calling out for help. That is what accounted for the banging. His charred remains were found. For a young Uzma, there were no safe spaces, not at home, not in the streets. This was reiterated when her school in Lal Chowk, the emotional heart of Kashmir, named after Moscow's Red Square, witnessed a huge bomb blast close to its gates. I was tying my headscarf before I stepped out, and that is what saved me. After the blast, everyone was alarmed. I tried desperately to find my brother. I pushed my way through the crowds, rushing past my classmates prone on the road, some blood-stained, some crying. I heard a visually challenged teacher ask repeatedly, "What's happening?" I had no answers. Finally, I called home and was told my brother was safe, so I too found my way back to my residence. Everywhere there were troops frisking school bags. "What's this?" I was asked. "Lunchbox," I snapped back, my anger obvious. A part of me was pleased that I had confronted the security troops in my own way. I thought my mother would commend me for my bravery, but no. Instead, she scolded, "You should never have done that." I was traumatized. Uzma also recalled, when I was very little, I would sometimes try to hide within the folds of my grandmother's cloak to escape the gaze of the troops. As a teenager, I took to sitting in cupboards. Enclosed spaces actually made me feel safe, as though I was back in the home, in that buffer between the worlds of life and death.
There are many other very interesting things, but you shouldn't give too much away because everybody should buy the book and read it. It's a small book, it's very easy to read. And, So let me now just ask the people who are on this panel. First, let me introduce Indra Munshi, who used to head the Department of Anthropology, Sociology at the Bombay University. Saaib Mirza Beg, have I got it right? Yeah. Who's from Kashmir and who's working here with SEBI. And Sandhya, who's a well-known activist with the Forum against oppression of women. So Indra, would you like to start first?
Yes. Thank you, Freny. Hello, everyone. I have read the book with great interest. Every word of what was written there. It was extremely interesting, written with a lot of sensitivity and empathy, and it leaves you trained in the end, as would be expected. Although, of course, there are voices of courage and hope and questioning and challenge and all that, but these are stories, narrations of tremendous pain, suffering, hatred, anger, resentment, doubt, and all these strong emotions, and fear, above all, dehshat. Dehshat ke din or dehshat ki raatein. When every knock is, could be death, could bring death. So these are stories of women who have lived through all these, plus suffered from the frustrations of their men at home, plus suffered the barbs and jibes of the society, just because they were raped or molested, or because, they had to run away somewhere, or because somebody remarried, or because somebody had to remarry because the society and the family decided it. Patriarchy at its best or worst. So, and above all, as one woman tells Freny, you have to take care of the house. You also have to take care of the house and the children, and you have to keep all this going on. The mother and the younger brother and all that. And then they come out to protest. They protest against militarization of their land. Which it's claustrophobic for them. And these are narratives. These are narratives. In the last two chapters, Freny tells us how there is a lot of questioning among women about religion, patriarchy, politics. There are doubts. What does religion do? Does it in fact strengthen patriarchy? How are politics, religion, patriarchy, how are they all connected with one another, reinforcing one another? What are they doing? Where are we to find and express our voices in a place which is totally controlled? So, with care and concern and control, they are trying to find some meaning in their lives. And these are stories about these women. It's done, as I said, as as much as one can enter another's life. I, as a researcher, know that it's extremely painful for the person who's collecting them, painful for the person who's repeating them, having gone through them, but it is also therapeutic. It's also therapeutic for people who actually tell these stories. Painful, but in some way therapeutic. Now, I think it is really a disgrace the manner in which the Indian state has handled the so-called Kashmir problem. There's complete, disgust one can feel for it when the army can go there and run riot and violate people's spaces and bodies and homes and everything. want to say that there are, in addition, narratives where, for example, which come from friends and relatives, where, for example, a Muslim highly qualified doctor who stays alone in her home suddenly has two militants coming to her home and saying, we'll burn your car if you don't give us so much money. And she says, why? Because we are doing something very good. So she says, I refuse to do it, goes to the masjid, and the Maulvi Sahab is there and tells them, please tell me, are they enjoined by our religion to do this? There are also narratives how a Hindu family in some village suddenly has their door broken by some army jawans who come, throw all the grains which they had stored for winter, looking for militants. There are these narratives also. I think, you know, in this whole very especially complex situation, women of course have had a very special role. They have shown courage and they are showing courage. They are still working with organizations that will help children resettle, that will help widows, half widows, full widows, who are reduced to the humiliation of having to ask the state for compensation, having killed their brothers and husbands. I mean, every minute one sort of dies, 100 deaths. What I feel somewhat strongly about is, there is the ladai for azadi. Now, my own grief with this is, those who propagate it, they have their own agendas. So many different agencies have agents who are sort of players in this, have their own agendas. The army cannot bring peace to the valley. They can bring silence. They cannot bring sukoon and peace. Similarly, I think militancy and militants who actually, I mean, today there are more foreigners than our own Kashmiri boys. Nor can they. I believe that. I don't believe that peace and a good society for which the Azadi should be. I don't think there is much clarity among even people who are fighting for some justice, some equality. I don't think too many people understand what are they fighting for. What does Azadi mean? Is Azadi in Kashmir to destroy the fabric of Kashmirian? Why was that society so broken up when Pandits were forced to move out? What were they doing? They were doing what was most vital to that society, to the fabric of that society. The Kashmir today is not the Kashmir that was. My journalist friends tell me the children of the 90s and later generations will not know how muhallas were organized. The Muslim muhallas and the Pandit muhallas. They will never know. And my plea therefore is, Azadi from what? From militarization, of course, from political domination, from denial of rights, political rights, social rights, from patriarchy, but not from diversity, not from a democratic liberal society, not Azadi from that. Kashmir was very different. I mean, there was rishis, and there was Dalyat, and there was Khatun, and these are part of the growing up, part of living in Kashmir. When I hear my elders speak, they speak of all this in one voice. It didn't mean a girl, a Muslim mohalla adjoining yours, was the daughter from that mohalla was Pane Mahalich Ur. अपने मोहल्ले की लड़की की शादी है, वहाँ जाना है. So it is not Azadi from that diversity where Christians, even in Kashmir, not to talk of J&K, even in Kashmir, Hindus, Muslims of all hues, Sufism, then there were some Buddhists, lots of Christians who contributed greatly to education and health, Sikhs who were running shops there, and ethnic communities. So, what kind of a society do we envision? Do people envision? Equality, democracy, some kind of secularism, some diversity. I mean, it's like in the rest of India, this is just what we are fighting for. We're fighting for democracy, we are fighting for equality, and we are fighting against state repression of all kinds, but we have to preserve diversity and pluralism of this country. So, anyway, I am happy the book has come, these narratives are before us, and as I said, you can see in the last some chapters, it's not just pain and suffering, which there is, but there is also a lot of questioning, doubting, challenging, resisting society, its norms, what kind of politics there has existed. There's a lot of, I wish there was a sane voice which would show that this Azadi should be for a better society, a far more egalitarian and diverse society. Thank you.
Thank you, Indra. I think it's important, it's interesting what you say, but I think it's really important to understand that these discussions actually are taking place in Kashmir. So, you know, this other discussion I was at this morning, somebody got up and said, but why don't the Kashmiris introspect? You know, and you know, I thought, who's this person? On what basis is he assuming that they don't introspect? You know, and so therefore even your suggestion of what your interpretation of the way Azadi ought to be, we cannot assume that that discussion has actually not been an integral part of what has been going on. It's only that we only hear about one part of it because of the narrative that the dominant media in India and the government of India has chosen to put out. So I won't say more than that. I think Sahib,
Can I say one word?
Yeah.
For example, I would have found this excellent narration more complete. For example, I believe there are some Hindu households and Sikh households. I would have been happy if they were incorporated.
Actually, I had written a piece on the pundits who stayed back. That was, it came as an article in the press. And I had wanted to pick out these voices again, but there were some problems of being able to approach them and talk to them, which is why. But maybe Saib, I think, would know or would be better at this thing on this diversity.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we have Sahib here from Kashmir,
Yes.
I think let him.
Incidentally, there are 3,000, 4,000 Pandits still living in Kashmir who never left and who have stayed on, and a sizable Sikh population is in India.
Good evening. My name is Mirza Saaib Beg, and I'm a lawyer. I'm based in Bombay, but I'm from Kashmir. And I'm also a part of this generation that we are just talking about. It was born into the Tehreek. I mean, my generation has seen this throughout, but it's important to sort of flag this point at the very outset that what happened post 1988 wasn't new. You are often told that that is what marked this whole militarization and militancy in Kashmir. In fact, what happened post 1988, it was inconceivable for anything else to have happened given the policies that the Indian government had adopted till then. In 88, when the elections were rigged, the MUF, which was a political party over there, they lost the seats. And in some cases, even after the announcement had been made for an MUF candidate to have won the elections, the results were just annulled and the opposition candidate was declared as the winner. So it's often said that this is what led to militancy in Kashmir, because all hopes of any democratic resolution from the Kashmiris, any democratic participation from the Kashmiris was always rejected. This is true as the immediate cause of what happened post 90s, and Freny has also spoken about this in the first chapter. So, but every single policy that was adopted till this point would have led to the same outcome. Even if the MUF had won those elections and they would have contested in the assembly, they would have passed a resolution for self-determination, or a vote on Kashmir, whether we want to be a part of India, a part of Pakistan, or independent. Had they done that, the Indian government would have dissolved the assembly, and again we would have come back to square one, which is militancy. So militancy is there is no other possible outcome to the policy that were adopted by the Indian government till then. And when I read this book, Freny had sent me a manuscript a few months ago. When I went through these narratives, it's reliving every single story in the book. You won't ever meet a Kashmiri who will not tell you, who has lived in Kashmir, who will tell you, I don't resonate with these things. Everyone has gone through similar humiliation, similar experiences. Every Kashmiri has a person who they know or has experienced this kind of humiliation, torture, ghastly violence themselves. And it has left psychiatrists on our society. It has mutilated minds. It has diverted us in ways which is very drastic. But what you see today happening in Kashmir is a direct result of policies that have been adopted by India. It is a direct result of failed promises, of never having tender to wounds that have been created by the government's policies in Kashmir. And this is going to continue. So this idea of Azadi, which people outside Kashmir, they often say that we don't know what you mean by Azadi. I mean, we have been talking about Azadi for 70 years now. For 70 years, if you are not able to understand what this Azadi means, then there's a problem in the way this narrative is coming to you. And I don't blame you for it, because you are exposed to a single narrative from your governments, which leaves very little space for any parallel narrative. And you are dependent on the state's narrative of things in Kashmir. So I commend works like what Freny has put forward, because this is really bringing out the other narratives. And not just statist narratives or political narratives, but narratives of individuals living through the conflict in Kashmir. People who are experiencing this day in and day out, living through it courageously, battling it out, and how their lives are affected by it. So when you talk of Azadi, at its very core, because this came up in the discussion, I thought I should just touch upon this. At its very core, it is a rejection of what India has created in Kashmir. That's the very basic understanding of Azadi. How we choose to take that Azadi forward, it is not India's domain to comment on that. You cannot say that you have not created a diverse enough society, so this is not a good enough Azadi. I accept it, we have to have a diverse society. And we want to have a diverse society as well, which is why Kashmir had first, Sheikh Abdullah had initially opted to be with India. Initially the thought process was that since Pakistan was formed on a single, a monolith religious identity, ours was a very multicultural society which seemed more synonymous with India. But we also wanted to retain a certain degree of autonomy, a certain degree of freedom. But within the first 2-3 years of Kashmir aligning with India itself, Sheikh Abdullah realized that India's position on Kashmir has always been one of complete integration. No matter what promises were made by Nehru, from the speeches he has given till 1958, whatever has been said before the United Nations. And you know, this discussion on Azadi is not new at all, not just from the perspective of separatism, but also from the perspective of mainstream political parties. So, as a Kashmiri, when I look at the political parties that represent me, when I talk about them, I see mainstream political parties that are pro-India, and I see separatists that are either pro-Pakistan or pro-independence. So there is not a single, even if we talk about the pro-India parties, there is not a single party since 1947 that has said we want to integrate with India. PDP, which was formed quite recently, about 20 years ago, they talk about soft autonomy. They talk about self-rule. So they also don't talk about integrating with India. National Conference talks about going back to the 1953 position, which is when Kashmir had a prime minister, Kashmir still has its own constitution, and we have our own flag as well. So they talk about having greater autonomy with greater positions of control in the state. And then you have the mainstream, the separatist parties that talk about complete separation from India. So when you have a political structure in place where not even the mainstream pro-India political parties are talking about complete integration with India, then why is the idea of Azadi something new? If the British were to say to India that your idea of Azadi is not good enough because you don't have people who are literate enough, you don't have people who are above the poverty line, you don't have people who are given enough facilities, it's not an argument to deny someone's desire for independence. And like I said, there are issues with the state, there are issues of patriarchy which you can see in the book as well, how women have to negotiate these spaces. But they are negotiating these spaces. Recently, in fact, when women came out to protest, they threw stones and there were these photos. There's a photo of a woman who's showing the security forces her middle finger. And there's also a photo of a man who's doing the same. So in public discourse, the photo of the man is seen as he's a son of the soil who's standing to this oppressive authoritarian force, whereas the woman she's probably doing something wrong because she shouldn't be showing her middle finger. It transgresses boundaries of decency. That's the narrative, and we are fighting against that narrative as well. I'll show you how. So one of the militant organizations gave a statement saying that these women should not come out to protest क्योंकि तुम्हारे भाई अभी जिंदा है तो तुम मत निकलो. But they responded and they said that the movement is not because of you. ये तहरीक जो है ये तुम्हारी वजह से नहीं है, तुम तहरीक की वजह से हो. So if they come out to protest and they are asserting there's a negotiation that is going on in this political space, and you might disagree with our idea of the political space, but we are trying to negotiate that. 2 months ago when I was in Kashmir, there were people who have been referred to in the book. We had organized a session similar like this to this in Kashmir, and the theme was on feminism and freedom of speech. So we discussed these topics over there as well, and one of the narratives that came up was revolving around feminism and how women have played a role in the movement. So they are again asserting themselves, they are talking about what freedom they want, and we understand that the idea, the movement for Azadi has to be parallel with a movement where we address all our other demons in society. And our society is not free of these demons, just as your society is not free of these demons, just as any society in the world is not free of them. But we are fighting them, and we are every argument that is given to us by our oppressors, each generation of Kashmiris has responded to that argument. Because we can only respond to what we see, what we are facing. We cannot create a utopian society, because even the creation of that society will have issues. So right now we are faced with certain issues. One is on how do we maintain our diverse culture, because that is the original identity of the state. With respect to diversity, even right now in Kashmir, you have a Sikh population that has never been harmed by this movement. There is a narrative of how in Chitti Singhpura, there were Sikhs who had been massacred. But again, there are so many elements at play in this whole narrative, in this whole scheme of things in Kashmir, that it is very difficult for an outsider to understand why something happened or why a particular individual was killed. It is only now, ये तो आज लोग बोलते हैं कि कश्मीर में हालात खराब हैं. In fact, the first statement that we had was that there is not a better time to talk about Kashmir, given how things are. कश्मीर में अभी हालात खराब नहीं है. In fact, things have never been better in Kashmir. The resistance has never been stronger from the people. I'm not even talking about a militant resistance. I'm talking about a civilian, a peaceful protest by people. Throwing stones, I mean, it's a very sweeping statement that I might make. Throwing stones, relatively speaking, the place where you're talking about, in reference to this place, even throwing stones is not really violent. Throwing stones is an act of protest. It is standing up, it is registering your protest. and sometimes women are told that this is not their place because we are a patriarchal society. Protest is very gendered. So the acceptable form of protest for women in Kashmir is that you write a Facebook post or you support this movement by other means, that you give food to people who are out there, or you support them by an emotional support, a moral support, but not active combat. And they have fought that also. So we are fighting these demons of patriarchy, but you will not be told about these things because the narrative that is given to you will portray only those demons that are easy for India to slay. You will be told that this is just an extremist jihadist movement. They cannot vocalize, they cannot concretize, they cannot know what they want. It is just motivated and they're all brainwashed by Pakistan. I mean, is my desire so flawed, or is my desire is my political desire, am I not even capable? Will you snatch away that desire from me as well? The capacity to have that desire. So there may be problems with the way the movements have progressed, because the militants in Kashmir, they don't owe anything to me. I have not elected them to be militants. But there are governments, because militants are all non-state actors. They don't owe anyone an explanation. You can't tell them, why did you do this? And there have been elements in the militant movement as well who have been psychotic, who have been absolutely deranged. And if you look at, there are militants like in Hajan, he was an ex-militant. He has just been killed recently. He has come on national television and he has claimed that he has killed 20 Pandits in Kashmir. And he was never prosecuted by India. There was a high court order which was asking him to be arrested. And when the police went to his house, he was not arrested at all. They said that he is not there. But Rashid Beg was there. And there are so many examples where the Indian state has protected these militants because they became Ikhwans. So they supported the Indian government in targeting other militants. And this narrative which is then created is that it is only, this whole fight is actually between Kashmiris. And coming back to the first point that I said about the 88 elections, the elections that were rigged, when the narrative is painted that it is the rigging of those elections that has led us to militancy, that led my generation to see what we have seen, and that led us to where we are today. The problem with this narrative is that it sort of diminishes our whole struggle to a fight between two Kashmiris. One Kashmiri who wanted to win the election and he rigged the elections, and the other Kashmiri who lost the election, so he went and joined militancy. But his rigging of the election, or this whole process that has led these people, these women to come out and protest, it is a direct result of policies that have been adopted by the governments. Because they have never addressed the concerns, they have never addressed the people, they have never reached out to them at all. Even in 2010, after those interlocutors came to Kashmir, what happened to their report? That report has just been shelved. And talking about the colors within the militant groups, whether they are foreign, whether they are indigenous, it is immaterial because Kashmiris, by official government statistics, which might be exaggerated, there are hardly 100 active militants in Kashmir. Most of whom are indigenous now, they are local. And most of the militants you see, you read about day in and day out, or being killed, are all local militants. This is troublesome perhaps for India, but I don't think India is averse to it. India wants Kashmiris to pick up the weapons. India wants Kashmiris to pick up guns instead of stones. Your army general has given out open speeches saying that I wish these people who are throwing stones had actually picked up guns. It would be easier for us to do our job. So India has in 1988 also, and today again, tried to push Kashmiris against the wall to pick up weapons. They want Kashmiris to shun non-violent means of protest and move on towards more violent means because they know it's far easier to crush us. There are 7 lakh security personnel in Kashmir, active security personnel in Kashmir. It is the world's most militarized zone. Even Iraq and Afghanistan at the height of the invasion were not this militarized. And this is just a part of the visible structure of forces. So what you read about in the book also, the people are experiencing just the visible part, and there's a massive structure which is not visible to us, which is the intelligence operatives, the realm of Kashmir where everything borders between slightly dark, slightly white, slightly grey. So nothing is clear in that realm as to which person sides with which political party or ideology. So there is even that structure at play over there. So we have experienced this at every level in Kashmir, and this, what you see happening right now, is a direct consequence of these experiences. So indigenous militants coming out is something which the government is actually pushing Kashmiris towards, because you have not allowed any protest, any result from non-violent protest. So when you quell the voices of non-violence, you must ask yourself, why is it that in 1988 there was no militancy in Kashmir if the idea of Azadi has always been there? Because there was a political protest. There are generations of Kashmiris who have worked their entire lives asking for a political, championing a political demand. Whether it was to the plebiscite front, to the political party recognized by the UN as well, which talks about, and the UN also has resolutions on Kashmir, which advocate a plebiscite in Kashmir. Whether they are applicable now or whether they are not applicable now is not the question. The question is, what have you done about it? What have you done to address these concerns over there? What have you done to address these people over there? You cannot dismiss them completely by saying that they are all brainwashed by Pakistan, because they are thoughtful people, they are thinking about their future, and we have given our present to be able to control our future. Because right now we don't control our future. When I was in Kashmir 2 months ago, I had gone to meet members of the JKCCS, it's a group over there. And while I was at their office, there was a little commotion. A young boy had been picked up outside their office, and some students had gathered and they were chanting slogans. So my house is just 2 kilometers away from there, and my grandparents lived there. I got at least 25 phone calls from them asking me where I was and why I hadn't left yet. It is unfathomable for you to understand what Kashmiris have gone through, and this is still a very, very elite, very, very protected example that I am giving you. There are people who are exposed to far worse every single day, which cannot even come out because of the structures of society that we have. And one example in the book is of a woman who had been raped, and then she was looked upon by other people as sort of damaged goods. And this is the problem of patriarchy, which we are also talking about in Kashmir. We are also addressing these concerns, because this is a lived reality for us, that we are going to face this. She is not the first woman to get raped. She's not the last one to get raped in Kashmir. And this is the sad reality that we have. But right now, the reason I said that things have never been better is because so many people have come out to protest and challenge the authoritarian nature of the state, that the state is also wary of killing people indiscriminately. A few years ago, we did not know if someone was killed. We did not know who had killed him. It would be very, very difficult to say it. But right now, and in that scenario, the state has a very easy hand. It has a free hand to do what it wants. Because you can blame it on anyone, which is the result of those mass graves, those mass killings that have happened. They would pick up people who are carpenters, plumbers, and offer them jobs in the army, and then kill them and say that they were foreign militants. And they just bury them somewhere. So there was a DNA test that was done in the fake encounters case that showed that no, these are local people. And the men who did this were members of the Indian Army, the Indian forces. They all got promotions, they all got medals for what they did, because you have incentivized killing Kashmiris. You have made us a commodity. If any soldier captures a militant, kills a militant, he gets a reward for that, he gets a cash award for that, he gets promotions for it as well. So you have incentivized killing us in Kashmir, and it's only a matter of time. And we have seen this from 2002, 2008, 2010 again. And after it crossed a limit when these civilians came out to protest, you didn't do anything to address their protest either. So right now, unless you address these concerns, you are pushing Kashmiris further. The voices that you hear in the book, you are pushing these people further towards non-violent means of protest. But I must say this, that we have rejected non-violent means of protest for all these years, because there's a reason why you see only 100 active militants in Kashmir, and not every single stone pelter picking up arms. So we have rejected it. And unless you give us avenues where we can talk to you and tell you what Azadi means for us. Yes, we have to talk about it, and we will tell you whether Azadi means what kind of state we are trying to create. But right now, you have restricted us up to a level where you don't even want us to engage with our ideas, and you don't even want to let your own people engage with our ideas, because you are fearful of what will happen when they come to know that you have occupied us militarily against our will, and you are there not to protect us, but just to control the land. The narrative that is presented in Kashmir is that India doesn't care about what happens to the Kashmiris. It only cares about controlling this territory. And as long as this narrative is there, it's very difficult for you to make any progress in Kashmir. you will not be able to address the issues of Pandits, you will not be able to address the issues of Kashmiri Muslims either. And if anything has to be done to address those concerns, it's the Kashmiri Muslims and the Kashmiri Pandits who will talk amongst themselves to resolve whatever has happened. You cannot resolve it for them, because you are not an entity that can step in to push this forward. And the way the government has tried to step in is also only to create more fissures by trying to create separate colonies for Pandits in Kashmir. What will you do by doing? What will happen by doing that? Will they never step out? Is this how you will integrate them into the society over there? So there are definitely issues with it, and because the time is short over here, I can't delve into all of them. But I thought these 2-3 points I wanted to touch upon about what it means to live through conflict for such a long time. We have just normalized the most ghastly of violence for us as well as for you, because when a Kashmiri civilian is killed, a civilian protester is killed, you are not even allowed to ask, did he merit death? How am I being made safer by his death? Or a woman who's raped over there, you are being told that she wasn't raped, she is probably just saying this to malign the army. And this, if you propagate this narrative, then you will only reduce the morale of your soldiers. Is the morale of your soldiers so weak that a woman's FIR is going to reduce it? How are you going to fight a war? 2.5 wars, 2.5 front war which your generals are talking about right now? And you know, this whole warmongering that is being done in the name of Kashmir right now, who is it supporting? It's not, we don't want it, you don't want it. From my perspective, it is just in the interest of the 100% FDI in defense that you have right now that is justifying this war expenditure. Because the moment you are told some militant got killed in Kashmir, then you will not question why we spend so much more to buy more weapons. Because clearly the soldiers need weapons. Why are they using 1980s AK-47s? Why don't they have the latest INSAS rifles? Why don't they have the latest weapons? So instead of spending this money on actually reducing the casualties of life, the casualties, because history is going to judge your stand. What the stand that your country has taken. And patriotism is not about turning a blind eye towards the wrongs that your nation has committed. It's about standing up and putting forth the narratives that you would want your nation to side with. So I really commend Freny for this work. And when I went through it, I also relived many moments that I have gone through as a child. And it's painful for us, but it has become a part of our lived reality. And thank you for having me here today, and if you have any questions,
Thank you very much, Saib. I think you've made many, many interesting points. Yeah, I think this thing that you talked about incentivizing killing, I mean, the latest being, of course, the fact that Colonel Gokhale was rewarded even as the inquiry was going on about the human shield. And I think an aspect maybe we can take up in the discussion, which has also changed the way in which we are receiving information about Kashmir, is the aspect of social media. And that is the thing also that the state is attacking, because today was the 41st time, or yesterday was the 41st time in 30 months. In 6 months. In 6 months that the government has suspended internet services. So if this is one way in which people can express themselves and say what they want, show what is going on, and to even stop that, you're deliberately creating a pressure cooker situation where people have then no option. Even if they want to do it in a different way, they have no option because you're pushing them into it, and the Indian state takes no responsibility for that. And thank you for correcting me on this, no better time. I understand, I think Kashmir is something we should be addressing all the time. And in addressing by that, I don't mean us advocating what should be done, but in really trying to understand what is going on. And there is too much of the other kind of information, so it's very important that we have the occasions where we read books like Freny's, where we hear people like you, so that we get a better understanding. And let me just put in one more thing that I learned for the first time today, which again is part of this kind of, the way in which some things are projected. The human shield thing that went around, and thanks to social media, a lot of people saw it and it was discussed. But a woman at this meeting that I went to from Kashmir said, but the human shield has been used all the time by the army. you know, so it's not anything new for us, because at every time that the army goes to check in any of the places and villages or mohallas, they first take a local with them who has to knock on the door, so that if there is any kind of guns or anything in that house, that person will get killed first. So, you know, the human shield, she said, why are you all making such a big fuss about this one human shield, when it's been a fact of life for decades for us, ever since this conflict has gone on. So let me just get, before we open it up for discussion, let me ask Sandhya. I think the point that Saaib made about the demons of patriarchy, I think that is one thing on which we can all be united. Because I don't think the demons of patriarchy are any less in India than they are in Kashmir. And what is your perspective on this whole?
First, I would like to say that as Indians, we should stop defending this government and what is happening in Kashmir, and actually start supporting the freedom struggle. Every freedom-loving person would like to do that. And so look at what is happening within India. I mean, how different it is from what is happening in Kashmir. You have right in the middle of Bombay, in Baikhala jail, a woman killed, sexually assaulted by a woman. And what is happening today's newspaper, you see the jail authority actually asking all the police to come in support of those women. I mean, is it very different than what the Indian state is doing in Kashmir? All of us should be aware that what happens in all the mining areas where Adivasis are living, the government is not bothered about what the Adivasis' lives are or what they are doing. They are only bothered about the minerals and the MNC's profit. That is exactly what the government is doing in Kashmir. They are only bothered about Kashmir as territory. They are not bothered about Kashmir as people. So I think it is high time that we stop questioning Kashmiris and start questioning our government. That our government, it's not, and not only in Kashmir but here, right here, because this government is doing in Kashmir, same thing is doing to people here who are marginalized. And that is what something which we must understand and actually take steps on it. Particularly on Freny's book, I think another thing we should need to know is also the complex history of Kashmir. The question of alienation or self-determination is not even started in 1947, it is started much before. Because Kashmiri have been subjugated by various forces, including Dogra. And I think in few pages, Freny has actually covered the history, which is actually the enlightening part for many of the Indians, because for Indians, the history of Kashmir alienation starts only when the militarization started. You know, it doesn't go back to 18th century also, but it is actually started from there. One very interesting thing I found, I think everybody should start reading Freny's book right from the preface. Because what she has done is, she has actually made a list of questions, very sensitive questions, which cut across all the aspects of the society, whether it is economic aspect, whether it is social aspect, civilization aspect, family, relationship aspect, patriarchy aspect, and of course, above all, the intervention by the Indian state and militarization. I think she's enlisted those questions, in search of which she went on meeting people. And it's her journey. And when she's giving these narratives, she's looking for the answers for it. And, this is what the reader should also be doing. That is why I think it is very important, if you read the preface, you understand the complexity of the Kashmir and what the complexity of women are facing. I think the most important giveaway for me from just adding to this human shield, I myself have met young girls in Kashmir who were used as human shield when they were children of 5 or 6 years old. Okay, if they want to open a house, they actually push the children. I mean, I have spoken to the children who have been human shields, not even grown-ups, but children. What I want to emphasize actually is, through her book, what she is introducing to us is different form of resistance and movements in Kashmir. And I think that is very, very important, because all that we hear is the masculine protest by the militant. But actually that it's underneath the Kashmir society, there are so many different ways in which women, children are getting organized and resisting. And those movements of resistance are not even getting reported in Indian media. Now, if you look at, see, for example, a week back, what we saw is what we read about these children who decided to join militancy and left their home as young as 11 years old. And just one day out of the house, they couldn't be masculine enough at that age, to take to militancy. They came back. What happened when they came back? They were immediately picked up by the army. And if you see what happens in India, you would not be surprised what happens in Kashmir, even to the children who are picked up by the army and questioned. The sexual violence that we talk about is not only suffered by the women, it is suffered by children and women equally. It doesn't come out. There is almost like a torture manual which is followed by the military in Kashmir, and there are, you talk to any person who is tortured, men, women, children, anybody. There is a certain steps which they follow, and there is a sexualized torture which doesn't even get reported. What is getting reported is the protest by women on sexual violence. I think 91 was one of the major incidents in Kashmir where more than 100 women were sexually assaulted in a systematic manner throughout the night by military. How much of that? Punan Poshora. These are the twin cities. Out of those women, that time itself, around 31 women came out and registered their complaint. It has not been yet answered. Now, actually, all of us should be asking that, is it your duty of the soldiers to sexually assault women? Is it part of their duty? Why is it impunity given to these soldiers? Because this is definitely not part of their duty. But the Indian state has continuously given army impunity, and not only army, because of that even police also get impunity. In fact, one of the things which Freny has given in this book is, following some 95 judgment of Indian Supreme Court, there was a direction given by the Supreme Court that there has to be a compensation and rehabilitation policy for all the survivors of sexual violence. Even in Maharashtra, 2013, after 95, 2013 the scheme got drafted. Even in Maharashtra, women don't get compensation because lack of budget. But interesting factor which Freny has documented in her book is the scheme in Kashmir has a specific column which says sexual assault in police custody. No other state has this. Unknowingly, the state is clearly admitting to the amount of sexual assault which happens in the army and police custody. I think these are the pointers in her book. Basically, another important aspect of the women's struggle has been is that like one of the philosopher had said that people who forget history are bound to repeat it. I think the work done by organizations like APDP or women whose dear ones have disappeared, what is called enforced disappearances, killed, no information is available, is for years and years these women have been going to the police station, to the court, to the army camps, to the hospital looking for these people, but they are not only doing this as individuals. What they are doing is they have organized themselves, and almost every month they are reminding the entire Kashmiri people that these are the people who have disappeared and we cannot forget them. This is very important task which is done by the women's group and women's movement there, that they are asking people to remember people who have been lost. Because unless you keep that remembrance, you don't know what the state has done to Kashmiri people. Similarly, I think much before even the militarization of Kashmir started, Freny has spoken about a group of women, around 8 women who started this organization and came. Right?
Yes.
I think those are very important because just like, in the 80s when women's movement in India was taking up issues of domestic violence and dowry death, Kashmiri women were taking up. They are taking up issues faced by dowry, which is predominantly in the Pandit household. They had taken it up. What happens is this entire militarization assault by the Indian state has pushed Kashmiri decades back in terms of their own, evolution or their own way of establishing a democratic society. And I think India is the last country which can tell anybody what should be, diverse society and what should be democratic society. This has been happening for years. Now actually we have reached a point where actually we should be ashamed of even using this word in the Indian context because we are no longer a democratic society, no longer a diverse society. So I feel what is an important aspect of her book is actually bringing out these various moments, bringing out the role of the women, the role in which women have fought sexual violence. After Kunan Poshpura, now recently, few years back, almost 100 women came together and they filed a petition in Jammu High Court, and now it is pending in Supreme Court because there is a clear direction given by State Human Rights Commission that sexual assault did happen and these women need justice. But even today the Indian state is not listening. There are innumerable torture cases, people have lost limb, people are living, struggling. Each Kashmiri is struggling, not only in daily life but as collective. When you see people coming out on street, that is a collective resistance. And I think we need, as Indian society, at least we need to listen to the voices of women, voices of children, men, and we need to figure out that how we build solidarities. How do we strengthen their struggle and not question their struggle?
Thank you, Sandhya. Yeah. So I think as we have limited time, maybe we can have some questions to Freny or to any of the other panelists. No long speeches, please, so that enough people get a chance to intervene.
Throwing a stone, getting a job. There is a saying in there. Throwing a stone, getting a job. So people are saying that there is employment when people. Hello. Throwing a stone, getting a job. What do you want to say?
Getting a job?
That means they are getting 1,000 rupees one day.
First of all, I think you should go into the Indian Express report 3 days ago or 4 days ago when the NIA has done a report and said it's not true. Please quote that report. I quote that report that they are not funded. They are not being funded. Secondly, I think that for 1,000 rupees you would not come out and be want to get killed. I mean, I honestly cannot understand anybody making that comment, that you will come out on the street for 1,000 rupees. That too in a society like Kashmir where relatively there is not that much poverty or anything. But maybe.
No, I think you addressed it pretty well. But this is an oft-repeated argument that all stone pelters are paid. They are paid 500,000 rupees a day. And Mehbooba Mufti had said that it's just 5% of the population that is being paid these amounts. We often joke amongst ourselves as Kashmiris that, you know, if India spends literally billions of rupees in Kashmir just to maintain the security apparatus, if you spend that amount just for one day also, the stone pelters wouldn't come out at all, if this was the argument, if this was the truth that stone pelters are all paid. But I have so many examples that I can give you of people who are extremely well off, but it is just that they are triggered so badly by what they have seen again and again and again. And these people also realize that throwing a stone is not going to make a difference. The army isn't going to run away because our stones aren't that powerful. In fact, our stones aren't even powerful enough to create a narrative, because if they were, then we have pelted enough stones for a narrative to be created to sort of soothe your hearts as well. But they're not that powerful, we realize that. But it is the least that people can do to stand up and sort of reclaim some level of self-respect. Because we want to assert that we do not conscribe to what you have done, and we won't let it happen. So this is just a stand of resistance that people can put forward. And like I said, you know, if these people were paid, and if you say militants are also paid, so there's nothing stopping these people. Getting a gun in India, in any place, is not very difficult. So all these people you see pelting stones would have been carrying weapons, if that is what they wanted to do, and if it's just about unemployment. But this much I can tell you, that even if India were to build every single road in Kashmir with gold, you will still see people saying, "Hum kya chahte hain azadi." So it is not about unemployment. The people coming out on the roads and pelting stones are not asking you for jobs. क्या वो बोल रहे हैं कि आप हमें नौकरी नहीं देते हो इसलिए हम पत्थर मार रहे हैं? कोई नहीं बोल रहा हमें लैपटॉप दो. Because the Prime Minister Modi had come to Kashmir and said that we'll build stadiums over here, we'll give you sporting facilities, you know, we'll give you a flood relief also, whatever. No one's asking for these things. They're not saying we want jobs, that's why we're pelting stones. Or yes, unemployment is a problem of Kashmir, patriarchy is a problem of Kashmir. We have similarly other issues as well, like any other society would. But those are problems of Kashmir, and those are not the problem of Kashmir. The problem of Kashmir is the political issue which you must address. Whether stone pelters are paid or not paid, these are just arguments given to sort of dissuade you from even engaging with the problem of Kashmir. So I would suggest that this should be looked into.
If I may. The thing is, we've been talking about the atrocities by the military and all. Now, it's, the history of India tells us that after the 1857 mutiny, after the 1857 mutiny, there was a commission of inquiry appointed by the British. They went into the whole issue and were able to come out with a report in 1860, as a result of which the CRPC and all came into being in India, wherein the commission pointed out that the East India Company was empowered by the British military, and wherever the military is, deployed, these complaints, as you talk about human rights violations and all, take place. Even the UN peacekeeping corps are accused of, similarly indulging in atrocities against human beings, because they are limited as a military. They have a limited agenda and they go through with it, at any cost, so to speak, causing so much of collateral thing. So the real issue for Kashmir is to move, demilitarize, so to speak, and while this narrative happens, also a narrative on what is happening in POK side of, the same Kashmir that was divided. Because what happens is we tend to hear a lot about what's happening in the Indian side of Kashmir, whereas we don't hear as much, which is not to suggest that it's the most utopian land, of Kashmir in the POK side. So how do you, kind of reconcile with it?
Just with respect to the POK question, it's true, Indians do not hear much about what is happening in Pakistan administered Kashmir, Pakistan occupied Kashmir, or Azad Kashmir, depending on which political spectrum you belong to. And the reason is that you don't hear much about it because it doesn't support your narrative. Whatever is happening over there doesn't support the Indian narrative. There is no one in Azad Kashmir, POK or PAK who says we want to become a part of India. If there were, then India would, that would be prime time. Arnab Goswami would be showing that every single day, that look, these people want to become a part of India. That doesn't support the narrative that India wants to display. That is why you don't hear about it. But we do. I hear about my relatives in Muzaffarabad. I hear about what's happening over there. And it is true that they don't enjoy political freedom to a level where we would be satisfied and say, yes, they are much better off than we are over here. They also face political repression, but they don't face human rights violations to the extent that we see in Kashmir. And also this is what sort of lends a color of religion to the whole narrative, because then the narrative is portrayed that because, like say in Kashmir, in Indian administered, Indian occupied or your Kashmir, we would say that if there is a hartal curfew, then Jammu will block the roads and say we won't let you go for Hajj. Things like that happen over here as well. That doesn't happen on that side. So Kashmiris feel that, at the very least, on that side of Kashmir, there is no ghastly violence. It's not in your face. There is violence over there also, but not like this. There are no mass blindings. There is no nation in history that I can give you an example of that has blinded its so-called own people, the way India has blinded people in the last 1 year. And nothing has been done about it. All the mass rapes, the plethora of mass killings that have happened, the Hamal encounter, the Chitty Singhpura killings, there is no example that we have, no paddle that we can give where we say that this another society has also lived through this and been okay with it. So we don't see that happening on the other side of Kashmir. But with respect to development, which is something that comes up again, that the other side of Kashmir is not very, very well developed. Neither is this side of Kashmir. But development is never an issue for independence, because good governance can never be a substitute for self-governance. So no matter how good the governance may be, we want to have self-governance is the argument. So that's what we have to engage with. I think Freny, if you want to take it on further. Did I answer your question, or do you have anything you want to ask?
Can I just add? I actually went to Muzaffarabad in 2013 for a conference of women from both sides of the LOC. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. And so, for instance, I presume that because there is this beautiful tradition of handicrafts in Kashmir, that it would also be in Azad Kashmir, and then they told me that it wasn't so, because in that district it wasn't so. When I went to the market and I said I was from India, so I was wondering what questions people would ask me, and one of the shopkeepers said, "आप बताएं, ये तेंदुलकर क्यों नहीं आता यहाँ पे?" So I was absolutely astounded at all questions. The only thing he wanted to know was why Sachin Tendulkar didn't come to Muzaffarabad. Anyway, that's just an aside. But I think, our ignorance about what goes on is because, as you know, in this very room, a former colleague of mine, the Hindu, Meena Menon, who was in Pakistan and had to leave, Indian journalists who go to Pakistan are not permitted to go and report from any other place. They get a visa only for Islamabad and sometimes for Karachi, Lahore. And so as a result, even our understanding of what's going on is very limited to this whole thing of politics and geopolitics and so on, and not about life as it is lived. And I really think, I wish that because of the bus service, there would have been more attempts made at least for the Kashmiris who go across to come back and talk about it. In fact, at this conference, we were sitting like this. I was sitting with two other women, and at the end of the session, they both turned to each other and realized they were first cousins. I mean, they knew that the first cousin would be there, but they didn't know what the other person looked like, and it's only when they started talking to each other they did.
That's the other, just one small point that I want to bring out is that there is such horror, in uninformed circles that, oh, Kashmiris want to be with Pakistan, and want to tell them, for heaven's sake, it's one land, it's their land, there's family on the other side, what are you saying, And I think in the book there is a quote from Kaveri de Burgh Robinson has pointed out that in earlier days the border was very fluid. Many Kashmiris told me, how the jaake picture bhi dekh ke aate the. And soldier whom I met, not a soldier, sorry, man I met recently who had been tortured so badly by the PSF that his legs had to be cut off and his legs were cut off and had to be amputated. His crime, the complaint was that he used to wander across the border and help militants across in the 90s. And then he told me, क्या border? ये तो हमारा ही ज़मीन था, उन्होंने एक fence लगा दिया और अब कहते हैं border. I think you have to really start questioning what is a border. Your own land is made divided, then you are accused of being unpatriotic because across the land you have feelings and emotions for your own family. And when you do wander across, you are accused of heinous treason.
I just want to make one point about militarization, which is covered in Freny's book also. See, militarization it's not just simple torture, arrest, killings, but the military actually governs the entire Kashmir. What we have to understand is electricity, water, education, everything is at the mercy of, even marriages, yeah. And even what business will function in which village, even that is, it's not just militarization, it's actually completely army rule. It's not even, actually some of the chapters one of the chapters she refers that how they are running schools, they are making children, Kashmiri children sit there in the school and Sare Jahan Se Acha Hindustan Hamara. These are the songs they are forced to sing. So militarization it's almost an entire regime of ruling the area, not just punitive war.
Hello. First of all, I would like to thank you, Ms. Freny, also for writing such a wonderful book. Being a media person, I was under the impression that book launching bolega to just coming over something and saying so and so thing. But after hearing from all of you, I am completely surprised that what was said about the Kashmir and what was actual pictures brought by you people. So in fact, I thank to all of you who has done a great job by bringing out the reality, the real fact, what is going on actually. But one more thing I would like to add here is that nowadays we human beings have become very selfish, to be very frank. Hardly few people really will help you. If you want the advice, there are lakhs of people are there. But if you want the support, hardly one person will come over there, sir. So thanks for everything actually.
Freny,
One second, just wait. The mic comes to you.
Freny, you have, I think you have biased against our military rather than attacking the militant people who are coming from this thing. Do you have the feeling, same feeling?
Have you read the book?
Not yet.
Okay, so when you finish with the book, yes, certainly I have a bias against any acts of yeah, I think if there is gross human rights abuse, I certainly have a very strong bias. You're absolutely right there. For the other part, I would honestly and truthfully want, I think we know also, I would really wonder why you sent someone out to Kashmir to fight wars that would have a political solution long.
Yes.
Okay, I think it's on now. Yeah, thanks for this brilliant book, Freny. And actually, I have a comment rather than a question. What I got from the book is the great amount of complexities that exist in the lives of the women and the children, and the families that you've talked about and met. And one thing that kept resonating for me, I just wanted to share that, was that a lot of some films I've seen, some books I've read, about refugee populations from areas of conflict, in particular Palestinian refugee camps in other countries, and also Afghan refugees in Pakistan and so on. This story that you also bring out very much of women who have in very difficult times become independent, arrived at a certain amount of autonomy, ways of, making decisions, taking certain kinds of steps which they couldn't earlier. When things either या तो हालात थोड़े संभल जाएं या फैमिली की परिस्थिति थोड़ी सी ठीक हो जाए या जो मिसिंग आदमी है वो लौट आए, again the patriarchy comes into play, and the freedoms that are so hard won, usually for the sake of the men who have gone away, shrink again. And this is a narrative I have encountered in these other, it struck me very much that I've encountered it only in the context of refugee populations, and I wonder if there's something to be thought about there.
Actually, one of the things of Kashmir is that the minute you go in as a journalist, one of the first people that you are asked to meet is Parveena, who heads the APTP, and her own story itself is so remarkable. And then the second woman that I met is Zamrud, who also was jailed. And one of the most, I think it's Zamrud who says that that's where she was jailed, and she was in Delhi and in Tihar. And after she came out, she realized that there are two missing populations in Kashmir. One is the people of enforced disappearances, men who were just picked up by the army and never seen again. And the second missing were those in jail. And I think yesterday's paper, day before, we have a list of, I don't know how many Kashmiris who've been held in jail for years and acquitted finally after 15 years, 20 years. So after she came out, she decided that she would be giving all her time to fighting for people who were in jail. And then she told me this, कि मैंने सोचा था कि मदर लोग मेरे साथ आएंगे, but the first thing they said कि नहीं अब हमने अपना कर लिया, that they had done their bit by being in jail और घर की मुसीबत है. And she said that as a woman, that was the difference. She felt because she had suffered, she had to take the fight forward. And the other thing is that I have not been able to properly put in the book, but I found out later was she really suffered because her wing of the organization that she was with. While she was in jail, there was a kind of another woman took over that wing, and there was some lot of bitterness. But she didn't reveal that bitterness to me because she thought it would be sort of damaging to the movement. And she still continues, and I think I love that phrase in which she says, कि मुझे ये बिचारी मत बोलो, मुझे तहरीक नवाजी बोलो. And she's that kind of person. You just absolutely cannot pity me.
I want to make a comment about this. What you're now seeing in your body is about a lot of Kashmiris being attacked outside Kashmir in India. We've seen that recently. We've seen that, including journalists who are Kashmiris working in the mainstream Indian press here. So I just have to comment, or I don't know. It's a very worrying. We've not seen this before. Yeah.
Just one more point to add on this. I was thinking about what's happening recently, where Kashmiri Muslims are being attacked outside Kashmir, and I was thinking that it's not just that the hatred is directed towards Kashmiri Muslims, because the vast population is not so nuanced that it can distinguish between Kashmiri Muslims and Indian Muslims. So this hatred which is being created was possibly engineered only for Kashmiri Muslims because they're a special class of Muslim. They are at best anti-national and at worst terrorists. So they are within those brackets for these people. But these people cannot restrict their hate just to a Kashmiri Muslim. It is spreading all over, and this hatred is going to divide the country that you cherish so much even further. And it is right now, as you see right now. So yes, this is all. Yes.
Thanks, Freny, for writing the book. I had this question in the context of this huge hangama that we have in rest of India about punishing the rapists, especially after December 2012 and, amendments and the law and everything. But clearly in Kashmir, there have been so many rapes in Kashmir. What has happened to those FIRs, to all those processes? Perhaps I'm thinking that will illuminate what happens to seeking justice there.
Well, the most notable case is Kunan Poshpura, which is stuck in the Supreme Court. And interestingly, the battle for Kunan Poshpura was taken forward after the 2012 by a group of the young Kashmiri women who felt that even in India there could be so much noise about a single woman's rape, then why couldn't the rapes of these women in the villages see some kind of justice? Well, there's a whole slew of complications. Basically what has happened is that at every level, the J&K state or the Indian army has brought out an injunction and stalled it. So that's the fate of Kunan Poshpura today in the Supreme Court. In some of the, here I have to point out what is very important is you can't even file an FIR in many parts of Kashmir. In the 90s, you could not go into a police station and complain even about the army. There was so much intimidation. I have the story of Lady Monabra, not of a rape but of her husband being killed. Even when she tried to file an FIR, and interestingly her father was in the police, for 15 days they refused to file. She had to go to court to ask for them to file an FIR. All these cases are stuck because of AFSPA. You need the sanction. And not a single case in entire India have you given sanction to prosecute a single army officer. That's the fate. So the logical question for a lot of people, and which I read in the book, is why the hell would you spend 10-15 years trying to fight for a case? And the women just say this, that the case itself becomes our struggle.
Okay, we have one last question. I think there's somebody in the back. You've already asked. So, is there anybody else who'd like to ask? Giving a chance to others.
I just partly a comment, partly a partly a question to Saib. I think what is happening, I mean, within this room, it's all very well. We, I think, broadly think similarly, and we are very sympathetic and so on. but the discourse in the rest of the country is getting worse and worse and getting totally vitiated. So even cases like this, what Freny is talking about, which is at the Supreme Court, I'm sure that the vast majority, apart from a few people who may be following Kashmir or reading about it or discussing it or going for conferences and getting reported, but how do you take that entire thing to the broader? Because today we are being faced, as you know, the minute you say anything, you're an anti-national. The first thing is anti-national, and we're all going to now start getting, actually seriously be facing repression. I mean, physical, political, whatever. It's not just Arnab saying it on his channel, but I think it's going to come down to each individual, whoever takes a stand even, So I think how do you build these bridges across the countries to people, to broader amounts of people? That is, have you all been thinking about that? Sorry.
I think as regards building the bridges, you just have to keep creating platforms such as this. You have to keep bringing these narratives out where Kashmiris talk about what has happened to them and you listen. Because I understand that you as individuals are not the oppressors. Like she said, we all think similarly, if not in the same manner. You individually are not the oppressors, but your silence amounts to that. And every time you have been silent, your governments have become stronger and more bold in suppressing us. And this is used as a vote bank after that. It's used as a poll plank. Because the more you suppress these anti-national Kashmiri Muslims, the more you show that you are strong on any element that is anti-national and we will not tolerate it. So you have to just keep fighting the way we have been. We have been doing it for 70 years now, and with each generation, it's only becoming stronger because every generation, see, when I read these stories in this book, it's not just my own memories that I relive, it's the memory of every single person who came before me as well, who has lived the same things again and again. So our protests, our resistance is amplified. So you have to understand that what has happened in Kashmir and what is happening there will also happen in India with Muslims, with minorities, and all the tools that the state has used over there are being used against you as well, and they will continue to be used against you because you are in fact far more enslaved than we are. At least we acknowledge, we are aware of the occupation and we are aware of the forces working against us because the state has worked in such a blatant and naked manner against us that we see it clear. But people in India don't see it as clearly. So you, in my opinion, are even more enslaved than we are. So you just have to fight it the way we've been fighting it.
Just to add to what was said, this whole anti-Muslim environment in the country, I mean, that is something we are now confronted with all the time. One becomes, even a Hindu, he or she is not anti-Muslim, becomes anti-national. So, I mean, we are now in this very strange situation. Of course, one supports all these struggles against state oppression, against all kind of oppression, human rights, but we have now, the rest of India is confronted with a Hindu regime which very clearly expects you to be anti-minorities, anti-Muslim in particular. So our struggle is there.
Yeah, I'm afraid we'll have to end because this hall has to be vacated. So thank you all. Thank you, Freny, again for the book. Thank you all the panelists. And I think there's tea outside.